Oh well. Oh well. Some stuff has happened in the last day. We have gotten some more changes to specs. We have gotten some more changes to Torghast. And we've gotten the last touches to Mythic Bosses before the release of Mythic Raiding. As well as the now 2 days delayed look at the Raid and Mythic Plus performance that we have skipped for a while now, to see if anything has changed, and the last final look before Season 1 finally releases tomorrow, or today if you're in NA. Maybe even right now, I don't know when this is gonna come out. I don't plan things. Let's start with the nerfs and buffs. So, Unholy Death Knight has gotten its nerf up a bit. It went from 15% nerf to their mastery to 20%. This is going to be even more relevant. I already touched on this on the first time. With over 90% of their damage coming from their mastery, it was super strong. Nothing like back in BFA. Now that their mastery is also going to be touching pet damage as well, that was just a ridiculous buff. So now they are attempting to tone it down a little bit more. As I mentioned already, the first time we went over this, I think Unholy was the most problematic of all the specs that needed to be nerfed. Other specs had very strong points in a particular area. Balanced Druid with single target burst, marksmanship with AoE burst, whereas Unholy was just damage in every single situation, because, you know, it's pet damage, it's shadow damage, it's everything they do. So it was much harder to pinpoint a particular area where you wanted to nerf Unholy. Maybe an ability, maybe a talent, it was much harder. So I think this nerf is fine. I think this nerf is good when it comes to the problems of the spec, when it comes to how overloaded they are. Where I have problems is in the other two nerfs. So when I made my predictions for buffs and nerfs, I said, okay, you need to buff Assassination, Havoc, and the Warrior specs. They have been buffed. And then I said, you need to nerf Unholy, Marksmanship, and Balance. So Blizzard nerfed Unholy, Marksmanship, and Balance. So they nerfed Marksmanship with 5% less damage on Aim Shot and Arcane Shot, and then they nerfed Balanced Druid with 6% less damage on Starfall and a nerf to their Legendary. Rather than starting at 50% extra crit, decreasing 10% every second, is going to be 40% at the start, decreasing by 8%. There's my problem, because I don't think these nerfs are going to do anything. For Marksmanship, you know, mixed between single target and AoE, their Aim Shot and Arcane Shot are going to fluctuate between 40 and 50% of their damage. So if you nerf 50% of your damage by 5%, that's 2.5% total damage less that you're doing. It's a rather small nerf, and as I mentioned, the problem of Marksmanship isn't about the damage of Aim Shot or the damage of Arcane Shot. It is about what they do when they have multiple cooldowns stacked together. So I don't think this is going to fix the issue of the strength of MM when it comes to burst, to AoE burst particularly. So a little bit disappointed with this nerf. The other nerf, it's even worse, honestly. Balanced Druid, we're talking about, again, a 2-ish, 3-ish percentage nerf, but this is not going to fix too much of anything. Yes, you're going to get a slightly less crit chance when you do your combo of Celestial Alignment and Convoke the Spirits with an extra crit chance thanks to your Legendary, but, you know, that's not going to be it. It's not going to fix the issue with the spec, the burst they can do. Starfall damage is the same thing. The problem of Starfall is not the damage. The problem of Starfall is that it's essentially the only ability in the game which allows a spec to do damage without even realizing it. You are fighting in Stone Legion General encounter, there are going to be 10 adds in the air, spawning instantly. If you are a Balanced Druid, you can be targeting and tunneling the boss, and without even realizing you are ticking AoE damage on 10 different targets at the same time. They are in the air. You don't even see them. You don't even know where they are, and you're still pulling high DPS in AoE simply because you have Starfall up. Sometimes there's going to be adds spawning behind your camera. You don't even see them, you don't even know where they are, and you're still pulling high DPS because of this ability. Nerfing it by 6% doesn't change how unhealthy this ability is in the way it works. And it's still going to continue being a problem overall. So, another disappointing nerf in this case. And then we have a small buff, actually. Elemental Shaman have gotten one of their legendaries significantly buffed. It's a quality of life because now the legendary is going to last 25 seconds instead of 15. For the gentleman, not handy with how Elemental Shaman works, this legendary wanted you to use Earthshock and then build up 60 Maelstrom again to be able to use an empowered Earthquake. 15 seconds might seem a lot, but effectively it's actually pretty tight. You know, you wanted to get to 60 Maelstrom by casting 5 lightning bolts and a couple of lava bursts. You know, lightning bolt has a default cast time of 2 seconds. Even with some haste, it's gonna take you about 9 seconds to get 5 casts of lightning bolt. A couple of GCDs for your lava bursts, that's 11 to 12 seconds. So the wiggle room to be able to use this legendary consistently was actually pretty short. Even worse in raids, unlike Mythic Plus, where there is way more movement, there is way more coordinated things you have to do, and sometimes you just didn't have the time to use this legendary properly. Then again, all of this could have been avoided if Blizzard actually gave us the Beast legendary from the start, rather than hiding it behind a world boss. Nobody would have crafted this, and this wouldn't have been a problem. But hey, what do I know? Now, pausing a little bit on class changes, let's go in Torghast changes, something quickly. Tank and healer Torghast has been made harder. Now the health of enemies for healers have been increased, and the physical damage for enemies for tanks has been increased. Turns out that after the simplification of Torghast in a bunch of the enemies for melee specs, or melee DPS, it also made it apparently too easy for healers and tanks. Particularly tanks, actually. Now, the other Torghast changes have essentially shortened the time it takes you to ramp up any of these passive effects you can pick up. Before, it was something like 5% more damage stacking up to 6. Now it's 10% more damage stacking up to 3. Most of the numbers have been increased, something greatly actually, and the amount of times you can stack them have been reduced. So you're gonna get the maximum effectiveness of that passive much faster, much quicker. It's not gonna take you multiple picks of the same thing. Now the last part of the changes is concerning Mythic Bosses. Not too much we can say about this because we haven't seen Mythic Bosses yet, but we can extrapolate something from Heroic. Since finally yesterday we got our ahead of the curve, clearing all the bosses. Now for Mythic, they have further nerfed Sinseeker. Altimore was rather feared as just a second boss. I mean, an optional second boss. You can choose where to go, but ideally it would have been the second boss, but his damage was definitely not in line with the damage of a second boss. Sinseeker has now been nerfed for like the 3rd time in a row. Now it's gonna be doing even less damage, but trust me, you have other things to worry about in Mythic rather than Sinseeker. Sinseeker should have been an afterthought. It's a rather simple mechanic to deal with. The fact that it was hitting so hard, it was starting to make people scramble, looking for ways to cheese this, to spread defensives, and some ways to actually mitigate this insane damage. It was rather annoying, honestly, to deal with this. Artificer Zymox has gotten some slight changes, nothing really too relevant, just some small touches. What we want to go over, on the other hand, is Sun King Salvation, so the Kaltas fight. Because, despite not much changing in the fight, 2 main things have changed. Cloak of Flames. So, Cloak of Flames is the mechanic that is going to absorb damage or healing that you need to destroy before you can interrupt the ability he's casting. And like it happens in this type of situations, if you don't break the shield in time and you let him cast what he wanted to cast, something bad is going to happen. In this case, in a Mythic Raiding encounter, the something bad is a wipe. So right now, it looks like the shield value has been doubled. You will need a little over 35,000 healing in 6 seconds to break the shield, and 530,000 damage in 6 seconds to be able to break the shield. Now these numbers, when you try to, count the DPS you have and the healers you have and tanks, this is a fight, looks like you're gonna have to go with 5 healers, so you will need something like 6,000 to 7,000 DPS in 6 seconds for all your DPSers to be able to break this massively increased shield. It's unfortunate because I'm not a burst DPS spec, at least for single target, so this seems like another fight where lots of attention and lots of importance is going to be put in Mongo 2-button specs with tons of burst. That's what the importance of this fight is going to be now, with this very overtuned Absorb Shield you need to break through. Another pretty nasty buff is to Hungering Destroyer. Hungering Destroyer is another pseudo DPS check, some sort of pseudo Ashvane, where when he uses Consume, which is the big, wide damage he's going to be doing to all the targets, now the amount of health he's going to be getting back is going to be doubled, from basically 18k to 36k, every tick of Consume. So this seems like it's just going to delay and make the fight even longer, so it's going to make it an even more important DPS check to get this guy to die faster. We also have a Council of Blood buff. Particularly, the important one is going to be Dark Recital. Dark Recital is the thing where 2 targets are paired together and you start getting little swirlies on the ground following you. And essentially you need to, dance together without running over all your friends and without also running on top of each other and killing yourselves with this. Now, in Mythic, this was deemed a little bit too simple, so they are making the damage you take if you're further than 8 yards much harder, ticking for much more damage. 3k damage every half a second, 6k damage a second, you don't want to do that. It was deemed a little bit too abusable. A melee gets paired with a ranged, a melee runs in front of the boss, the range runs away from the boss, and that's it, no problem. Now you actually have to meet in the middle and start being together, which is obviously going to make it, more troublesome for everyone else, and you included. And now I'm not fucking going over all of this. Stone Legion Generals has been buffed by about 20 to 25% on all their abilities. So not much to say here. Big buff. It's gonna make it much harder. It was as I said, therefore as we said, because my word is law, this was the more undertuned fight of the last ones between Denatrius and Sludgefist. This one was the more soft one, so this looks like it's gonna be make it fall in line with the last end bosses. So these were all the changes. These were all the changes to Specs, to Torghast, and to the raid. Now let's look, a final look, before we end the video and before we end the week, at the state of the Specs right now. So let's go over first with raids, because there is less to talk about. This is what we had on the second day of heroic raiding. And now this is what we have on the basically 7th day of heroic raiding. Now we can see that more or less we are in the same situation, right? We still have Unholy and Balanced Druid very, very high, as well as Marksmanship and Shadow Priest. At the bottom, we still have Destruction Warlock, Frost Mage, Fury Warrior, Assassination Rogue, Havoc, Arcane. They have remained more or less there. Now, we start also to see now, this is the time we start seeing the cannibalism happening. When pure DPS specs, particularly, start having a clear and defined best spec, the other specs are going to get depopulated. They're going to start migrating to the good spec, to the better spec. So obviously Arcane and Frost are not going to get that much improvement because most of the mages are going to be playing Fire. Same for Affliction Warlock compared to Destruction and Demonology. As predicted before, Condemn being slightly better for arms is making more warriors play arms overall than Fury. Whereas the split between Elemental and Enhancement seem more balanced. It's still more Elemental Shamans than Enhancement, but when you factor in the fact that range DPS is more likely to be picked over melee, as well as the fact that Enhancement was way more unpopular in BFA, this seems a place they should be happy to be in, to be honest. The real surprise here, which isn't a surprise because I mentioned this unknowingly before, is Feral Druid. No, I haven't forgotten Feral Druid. It's just that, I'm annoyed by the way it's gotten there. If it got there because it was a genuinely better spec, because it deserved to finally have some spotlight or anything, it wouldn't be a problem. The problem being that right now they are basically getting carried by Convoke the Spirits. So for people who are not aware of Convoke the Spirits, you're gonna cast a bunch of spells randomly at the same time. It becomes very powerful because you have quite some strong spells that you get to cast. Now, for example, this is your run-of-the-mill Balanced Druid Convoke the Spirits, without Celestial Alignment, so without double empowerment from Eclipses, without the haste. It's about a 30k damage 2-minute cooldown, which is in line to be balanced with other specs. It's not too bad. I mean, it's slightly bad, but not that much. Now this is a Convoke the Spirits that you use inside Celestial Alignment. This isn't even the top, because it's just 3-star surges. You can get even 4, and there isn't a full moon here. And it's 100,000 damage in basically 3.5 seconds. You want to see something cool? This is a 210,000 Convoke the Spirits window with 3-star surges and full moon proccing as well. That's over 200,000 damage in basically 3.5 seconds. This is why it's making Balanced Druid extremely overpowered. But this ability still exists for Feral. This is your window of Convoke the Spirits for Feral, where you just spam a bunch of ferocious bites and you do over 100,000 damage with a single button. The only problem of this Convoke, the reason why it's not as powerful as Balance, is because Balance can further increase the effectiveness of Convoke the Spirits because they have Celestial Alignment, which works really well in buffing Convoke the Spirits, and also Balance has a talent that is a big fat hit, Full Moon. Feral Druid doesn't have access to a similar hit that can be that much damage extra in their Convoke the Spirits, so it's slightly less powerful, but it fixes a gigantic problem of Feral Druid. no burst. Too much ramp up. Too much damage based on DOTs. Too much time to wait, and then the mob is dead, and you can't get your effectiveness. Well, now you do with Convoke. That's why they become so much relevant in their damage, so far at least in the raid encounters. Now, on to the other part, where we can look at something a little bit different, is Mythic Plus. So, for Mythic Plus, the play rates of all specs hasn't changed. We're talking about 1 to 2%. It's not really relevant, we can't really extrapolate anything with this. What we can extrapolate is when we start looking at the play rates of all specs compared to the play rates at Mythic 10 and over. So, when we actually get the seasonal affix prideful, because now we have quite a few dozens of thousands of logs in that category. Before, when I made the first video about this on day 2, there were less than 40 groups logging in 10 keys or higher. Now we have several thousand, so we can actually look at this. When we look at tanks, we look at their popularity and then their popularity at 10 plus. So we can see that we have immediately something that is quite different. We can see that Guardian Druids were at basically 12% popularity, and then at 10 up, they were at 11.3. So very little has changed for Balance Druid. It's the spec that has changed the least. All the other specs have dropped down by quite a bit. Paladin went from 27 to 22, Havoc from 30 to 19, Blood from 18 to 13, and then of course we have the worst of the changes, which is Protection Warrior. They went from 10 to 5. So 50% drop. This is where we start seeing the community perception. The reason why all the specs have dropped by 20, 30% at the most, whereas protection has dropped to 50, is because the community has decided protection is shit, therefore I'm trying to do a 10 plus, I don't want to get a protection warrior. That's what's happening here. I am, though, surprised by Blood Death Knight in the popularity. From lots of people, knowledgeable masters of Mythic Plus, I was looking at the recommendations for tanks in Mythic Plus, the predictions. A lot of people were in line saying Havoc and maybe even Prot Paladin were doing fine, but the most other recommended spec was something like Guardian Druid, Brewmaster Monk, for similar reasons, of defensiveness, of tankiness. But very few were actually revving up Blood Death Knight. Yet it remains very popular within the player base. So I believe this is one of the cases of boomers, Blood DK being a staple of Mythic Plus, meta being very powerful, people just default back to Blood DK. It might also be the fact that with Unholy being very popular, some players might want to be going tank to get faster groups, easier groups, so maybe it remains popular that way. But I don't know, otherwise I can't explain it. When we look at healers, we have something very interesting. Similar to the community perception bit I just talked about. Restoration Druid goes from 29 to 29, basically. No change. Discipline Priest goes from 16 to 15, so no change. And Restoration Shaman goes from 21 to 27, whereas Holy Priest and Mistweaver Monk drop down. Mistweaver from 9 to 6 and Holy Priest from 13, almost 13 to 7. So what's been happening here is something similar. What's been happening is, when it's time to do 10 up, Mistweavers, but more importantly Holy Priests, which were that popular before, I mentioned being surprised that Holy Priest was playing that much, now they're getting declined. And people are basically just inviting Resto Shamans more. Resto Shaman and Resto Druid in about 50% of all the keys, and then the rest is going to be fought over by the rest 4 specs. So this is another case of the very first bit of community perception. Mistweavers and Holy Priests right now are on the down end, on the down low. I still think something like Holy Paladin and Discipline Priests are gaining a lot of rep, a lot of perceived power from their status in BFA. Because people remember them from BFA and even from Legion, they still get invites, but right now it seems clear that most people are going for Resto Druid and Resto Shaman. Now, on to melee DPS. Melee DPS, it's a little bit harder to gauge, obviously. There are way more specs, but more importantly, there are 3 DPS slots for every key, so who knows what you're going with. The only thing we can see from this is that basically most of the specs are not going up in 10 plus runs. They're not improving, except for very few. The very few being Unholy Death Knight, Outlaw Rogue, and Subtlety Rogue. These are the 3 specs that are being invited more at high keys than overall. Specs like Retribution Paladin are starting to drop. Specs like Fury Warrior are starting to drop. Specs like Frost DK, as I mentioned, Cannibalism. Frost DK drops by over 3 times their number in all keys compared to the 10 plus. basically they're all migrating to Unholy or they're not getting invited, here we also start seeing the first effects of the popular specs being wanted more at high keys, because it's my key, I just got to 10, I don't want to deplete it and go back to 9, I need to pick what I've seen being OP, so I'm just gonna pick the safe choice. Range DPS is also on the same note. I mean, the community is doing this for all specs, of course they're gonna be doing it for ranged as well. So most specs don't change that much. You have Balanced Druid going from 12% to 14%, meaning they get picked more at high keys. You have specs like Mages staying more or less the same, with, again, cannibalism happening. Arcane Mage dropping by basically twice as much popularity compared to Frost and Fire remaining about the same. Elemental Shaman from 6.3 to 4.6 is also dropping a little bit. Remember, Resto Shaman is becoming even more wanted in Mythic Plus, and Shadow Priest remains the same. But here is the biggest, one of the bigger examples of cannibalism with Marksmanship and Beast Mastery. As I mentioned multiple times by this point, you should know by now, you know, all of the boomers stuck in their old ways wanting to play Beast Mastery no matter what. That's what happens. When you go at high keys, everyone wants Marksmanship and nobody wants Beast Mastery. This makes the all keys population split between Marksmanship and Beast Mastery from 17% to 10%. When you look at the 10 plus, it becomes 25% to 5. That's the split. So it seems like right now Mythic Plus is also going to be split around Marksmanship and a collection of Fire Mages. And then the last spot, Balanced Druid with maybe a Shadow Priest, an Elemental Shaman, maybe an Affliction Warlock. And this is what we have before Mythic Plus fully opens tomorrow or today, and before Mythic Raiding comes in. We will follow what happens, we will follow the data as the numbers come in, as the statistics come in, and we can look at them. For now, this is the hand we are dealt. This is the hand your specs have been dealt. We have already started to see, as we have just seen, community perception and opinions about specs starting to shape the meta of Mythic Plus. Of course, the meta at the common level, the pleb level, the pug level. Some specs are slowly entering the pariah level of playability, where they just get ignored. And I said this would happen. I mean, I'm not taking credit. This was pretty obvious, but yeah, it's happening still. So, see you guys tomorrow for, I don't know what. I don't plan my videos. We will see what's gonna be up tomorrow. So, as I'm leaving, as I am taking my leave, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, go and make a group for a plus 12 with Protection Warrior, Holy Priest, Survival Hunter, Feral Druid, and Destruction Warlock.